welcome to another endorsement interview with the Times Editorial Board. Today we have with us two candidates for state representative in the 4th District. You have Ed Soliday, the Republican, as the incumbent, and his challenger is Deb Porter, the Democrat. Welcome. I'm Doug Ross, editorial page editor at the Times. Also with us in the room are Bob Heiss, our editor, Deb Anselm, our general manager, Krista Zavanovic, deputy editor, and Brian Vernellis, videographer. We should probably begin with giving us a little bit about your background and what's prepared you for this. Ed?
I was born and raised here in Valparaiso, as was were my children. I went to public schools here, attended IU, went to United Airlines at age 20, flew for them as a line pilot for about 22 years, then entered management, served there through as a director and then vice president of safety, security, quality assurance at the crisis center in 9/11. When I was a line pilot, I ran Kids Alive International, brought it here to Valpo. My wife and I did that free for 10 years. And then after I retired from United, I was the most knowledgeable party in the 9/11 depositions and litigation. Then entered the legislature in the minority for the first 4 years, still able to get bills passed. The first bill in the majority was Little Cal River Bill, which 6,000 homes were flooded. They had been at it for 30 years. We got a good compromise between the various parties. Doug, you were a witness to that, and I was really thankful this last heavy rains that we had no flooding with the Little Cal. Shortly thereafter, became chairman of the Transportation Committee, where we began a project of defining the condition of our roads, and we were able to acquire $400 million a year additional, which is 37% went to locals. First time in 30 years that's happened. So, without going through my entire legislative history, at United I spent as vice president of safety, security, and quality assurance. I spent a lot of time in Washington. Environment reported to me, occupational safety. I chaired the commercial aviation safety team, which was management, labor, manufacturers. Our mandate from Congress was to reduce fatal accidents by 80%. We received the Collier Trophy, which actually weighs 750 pounds, so I don't have a copy. I one at home. We received the Collier Trophy for reducing aviation fatalities by 83% in 10 years.
Okay. Deb?
Well, I also am a Porter County native. I grew up in Wheeler. I'm actually a Wheeler grad. Then I went to Valparaiso University, where I studied music education. Following graduation from there, I went to, my husband was studying for the ministry, so we moved away for 13 years eventually. We lived in St. Louis, northern Michigan, St. Louis again. Finally settled in central Illinois, where I got my first teaching position as a music teacher in a small rural school district. The first 5 years of my teaching career, every spring I was notified that I would not be renewed, and every August I was called back, except the last year. Then I was interviewed in a different district and worked for 1 more year. During that time, our 2 children were born, and then we went to South Central Arkansas for 4 years. We lived there where he was pastored a church. There I ran my own business as a bookseller, and I'd always been a piano teacher with a music education background. Moved back to Indiana when my husband left the ministry to change his ministry focus and go into hospital chaplaincy. At that point in time, we pretty much exhausted our savings to move back to Northwest Indiana. We moved in with my mom for 2 years and pretty much got by on my salary as a substitute teacher, which isn't a whole lot. At that time, the kids were on WIC. Our son was on WIC. Our daughter was on free and reduced lunch. And, that was a very eye-opening experience for me, having, at that time, almost a master's degree and living in poverty like that. We finally got our act together. My husband got hired full-time at Porter, where he's still a chaplain. We moved to Valparaiso. I taught in a private school for a while where my daughter was, she was a high-level gymnast. She was actually a state champion for 2 years in a row. And so on her track, younger in athletics, she trained very much. She trained 8 hours a day. So we had a school program with the gym that I ran, started that program. Then I got hired to teach in Duneland schools for 2 years, and then I moved to Portage, where I have been active as a teacher leader, working on several different district level committees. I'm president of the Teachers Union, where I've held that position for 4 of the last 6 years, and then got active in the political arena through ISTA, through activism there, and that's what brought us to this point in time now, where I just feel like there have been some legislative issues that need to go a different direction.
Okay, well, school funding is coming up, obviously, in the new budget year. So the question is, what do you see happening with that formula? We've got vouchers, we've got, all kinds of things going into the equation. What do you do, Deb?
I think the first thing that we could do is, first of all, we need to make a commitment to fully fund public education. And our first responsibility is to public education. While charter schools are nice, voucher schools are nice, the state's obligation is to the public schools. And so the first thing I would do is focus on public school funding. Secondly, I would, to achieve that end, we may have to trim back on some of the voucher program. We may have to trim back on some of the charter schools. We may need to look at some of the tax breaks that are given. For instance, we give homeschool parents a textbook tax credit that we do not extend to our public school students. That alone would generate some revenue. I know our state superintendent of public instruction has requested that the legislature look at making public education truly free in our state and doing away with the book rental. My husband's from upstate New York. When he found out he had to pay book rental in Indiana, he went ballistic. And literally every year just could not stand that we had to pay, this rental fee. He went to a school in New York, they didn't do the funding that way. And for him, it was just, how can this be free education if we have to pay this? So those are some ways that we could generate some excess money for public education. But we can always afford what we value. And so we need to make a commitment to value public education.
Okay, Ed?
Well, the speaker yesterday, you actually had an article in the paper, made a commitment that we were going to raise overall school funding. We're currently at the highest levels we have ever been in the history of the state. One of the things that he and I have had many conversations about that troubles me is that we have a real disparity in the school funding formula using the complexity index. At one time, urban schools were getting $11,600 a student, when here in Valparaiso, Porter, Portage, Valpo, Westchester, we're getting around $5,500, $5,000. Now, all of us agree that it takes more money for urban poor children. That's no question. The problem is that when we loaded up a lot of money, the graduation rates didn't change. And schools that were failing before continued to fail afterwards. So throwing money at the problem rarely works unless you've defined what the real issue is. Just as an aside, when I was in my former employ and we put our name on the United Center, we put 2,000 employees in the neighborhood, cleaned the neighborhood up. We gave every kid in the 6th grade class a scholarship to college if he finished high school. But I think the most important thing we did is we said to our management people, it's not mandatory, but you are highly encouraged, if you are a manager or above in the executive offices, to mentor a kid. And even the president of the company mentored a child in that school district. So I have talked to your publisher about the merits of this. I talked to the previous publisher about it. it's very, very difficult in a family that 3 generations haven't graduated from high school to express the value of an education. And one of the things and this is certainly not universal in the Republican Party, but I and several others have advocated, and we feel like we made some progress this year. Most of the rest of the world puts heavy emphasis on preschool education. In fact, at Portage, the superintendent and I had a conversation. They did an experimental program with some preschool work among some economically challenged kids, and they progressed so much more rapidly than others. So I'm going to continue, assuming I go back, to be one of those who presses for preschool education and greater funding. And quite frankly, the speaker was asked about it by Mr. Cardin, and he made a commitment to the Senate that we would not go forward with further funding till we saw how the test went. However, some of the rest of us didn't make that commitment, and so we'll see how that goes. But I think that's key, and I think mentoring, getting someone in young people's lives. But at the same time, I can't keep coming here to Valpo and to Union and Washington Township and Chesterton and watching the success we've had. I think our schools here and our teachers are really good, if not great. But you can't keep coming back and saying, oh, shucks, you don't get anything. So I think we need to reward those schools that perform well. I have a friend who was a principal in a school not far from here, and when she told me how much money she had as a principal there as discretionary spending, and then comes to Valpo, one of the better, if not best, school systems in the state of Indiana, and she takes money out of her own pocket to help the teachers with the kids. That's not right. So one of the emphases I know the speaker has made, and I agree with him, we should not have teachers taking money out of their own pocket to do the job of teaching our kids. So as far as, I really just not like to have a big discussion about vouchers, but bottom line is there are 20,000. We have 1 million students. The budget for education is somewhere around $7.5 billion, 16 million back. I don't know how that really helps the overall issues we have to deal with. So first and foremost, always, because the AAA bond rating is dependent upon a balanced budget, the Constitution requires a balanced budget. I have voted for balanced budgets. I plan to continue to do that. The Constitution of the state of Indiana requires a balanced budget. Requires a balanced budget. But there are all kinds of little accounting tricks that have been used in the past. One was to borrow money from the teachers' retirement fund. I have no intention of being part of that. We were able this year, the same amount of money we gave back to taxpayers, we gave about the same amount of money to pay the debt, start paying the debt down on the older teacher retirement fund. We're nowhere near in as bad a shape as Illinois, but we cannot continue to be in that position. We need to keep reserves so that we don't wind up in the position we were a number of years ago. When this recession hit, we blew through about $1.3 billion in about 6 months. So we can't put the bond rating in jeopardy. It's not because we want to brag about it, but because it makes costs rise, and they rise for everyone on the interest rate we have to pay.
Okay. One of the things that happened after the last budget was the creation of the Center for Excellence in Career Innovation. Mm-hmm. Everybody's calling it CC like it's some pizza buffet line. But the question is, should this agency continue to exist in the new budget, and how do you mend the rift between the Superintendent of Public Instruction and the State Board of Education? Ed?
Well, first of all, that's between the governor and State Board of Education and the superintendent. Superintendent does not have a lot of good person for everything I know, but she doesn't have a lot of board experience. The law is really clear, point where you and I disagree. The law is very clear. It's been this way for a long, long time. State Board of Education sets policy and determines procedures. Superintendent carries them out. So, having chaired some 28 boards in my life, my job as chairman of the board is to pull people together and to figure them out. Now, folks in the Transportation Committee will tell you, because it's a joke with them, I always know what the vote count is before I walk in the room. So I have said over and over again, I'm not going to get in the middle of that. They need to figure out how to work together for the good of our children. And many of the debate issues need to be resolved, and they need to resolve them. They have a responsibility, and they need to behave like adults.
Okay. Deb?
Well, first of all, I think that CC needs to go away. One of the ways to do that is in the budget to take away that line item. That would dissolve that budget. It was a budgeted item. It was kind of an item on the budget. I remember when we were looking at it, we were trying to figure out what that meant, because there is a workforce development program, and we thought that that money was going to be, before any of this happened, we kind of thought maybe that was going to be to help workforce development and people who may not have graduated from high school to obtain those, diplomas kind of thing, and job retraining skills and things like that. When Glenda Ritz won the election, and then the next thing we know, there's this new board being created. That board was created outside of legislative oversight. It was created at the whim of the governor, and it has worked contrary to the Department of Education and the superintendent. And I think a good way to set the school board back in motion of being functional again is to clearly define who's in charge. And this other board has many of the same responsibilities that the school board does. So doing away with the CC board, I think, would be one way of saving the state some money, and at the same time making it clear the responsibility of the superintendent and the school board. I agree that the school board needs to get their act together, and they need to act like a board, and they need to act like the adults in the room and do their job and put their political appointments aside, put their political leanings aside, and do what's best for the students of Indiana, which is what their responsibility is.
Okay. The one issue on everybody's mind, of course, is jobs and job creation. So what do you do, Deb?
We need to invest in new technologies. We need to invest in infrastructure, because there's a lot of jobs that occur when infrastructure spending goes on. We also need to be innovative and do things that create the environment where high-tech jobs want to come into Indiana. I was talking to a friend who works for a large international corporation, and they had actually looked at moving part of their program into Indiana, but because they had some agreements upline and downline for green to go green, Indiana's a coal burning state and pretty much wants to remain a coal burning state in a lot of situations. It didn't meet their requirement with their up and downline suppliers for them to move here. This is something we need to think about. Alternative energy is probably one of the hottest growing areas in our nation for new jobs and high-tech positions, and Indiana is not being innovative on that area. In my opinion, I think we need to do more there. And the other thing, if we've created such a great climate for businesses to come, we have seen some manufacturing come to Northwest Indiana, and we've seen some expansion, but certainly not the volume that we wanted. In the second quarter, Northwest Indiana created 4,700 new jobs, but 80% of those were in tourism and service-related industries, which means those are low-paying jobs, and a lot of them are temporary jobs. And those are not career lifetime jobs, and that's what we really need to be creating, are those career lifetime kinds of jobs.
Okay, Ed?
Well, first of all, let me talk about the energy piece, because that is key. About 80% of the energy in the state of Indiana goes to business and manufacturing. We are, if not number one, very close to the biggest manufacturing state. Folks come here, businesses come here for a number of reasons, and one of those is our low energy costs. Now, the mandates out of the Democrats that have come without congressional action have put our energy at risk. We have a great deal of wind farms. BP owns about half. That electricity is 25% more expensive than coal. We sell most of that energy to Illinois, because it's my general view that anytime we can get Illinois to pay more, I'm all for it. The whole energy world is changing. I serve on the Energy Committee. I'm an activist there. One of the things we have to do is figure out a way to stay competitive so that energy is affordable. Alcoa, aluminum, I can go on and on with the companies that have to have and consume a great deal of electricity. Unfortunately, wind and solar will not do it in the short term. IPL is doing some conversion to natural gas. Natural gas is very affordable with fracking, but you don't do it overnight, or the consumer's going to pay. One of the bills that I helped carry through, our infrastructure, whether it's sewers, whether it's wires, is old. Our roads are old. And one of the things you cannot do with energy is what we call in aviation fly to failure. So one of the ways to reduce the cost, generally the normal mode is let's suppose we're rebuilding the nuclear power plant up in Michigan, but 80% of that electricity comes into Indiana. We knew a large portion of it had to be rebuilt. Now, the normal model is that they go out and borrow money, they get it done, then they go to the IURC and ask for recovery. They pay interest through that whole time. So what we did was what's called a QIP, and we allowed them to estimate the cost, IURC oversight, that's the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, but they were allowed to have a tracker which increased the rate solely to do that rehabilitation. That seemed to work well, so we did a similar bill for NIPSCO, and that is creating a lot of jobs. That's about $500 million plus of replacement work that's happening in that infrastructure. Whether we're able to replace the plants or not with gas-fired, almost everybody in the energy industry says we need to explore all means of energy. The weakness in wind and solar right now is that you don't have a way to store it, and we need to have what's called baseload energy, which is the demand to keep your lights on during the day. Wind is most efficient at night, solar of course in the daylight, but none of them, we do not generate enough electricity to run U.S. Steel. So almost everybody in the energy world is saying this is going to be a transition time, and how we're going to transition from one to the other. Electric cars, for example, the manufacturers say, well, we don't have the batteries to really make it desirable to the general consumer, and the battery guys say we don't have enough commitment from the manufacturers to do the R&D for battery, so we're not going to do the R&D, and it's a chicken or the egg. So Tesla is investing about $1 billion, I think, in Arizona to build a very efficient battery plant. And one of the things the legislature will probably talk about is Tesla's entirely different model, which is no car dealers. No, As chairman of the Transportation Committee, I'll give you a little hint of where I am. If I'm not there, why, I'll be enjoying life. But if you're buying a car, I've never seen a perfect one. I think you ought to be able to look somebody in the eye and say, why doesn't this work? So selling cars over the internet is not I'm having trouble buying into that brave new world. I'm always willing to listen, but at this point right now, when they're selling $120,000 cars, caveat emptor. When you're selling $30,000 and $40,000 cars into the working people, then there needs to be accountability stream. So in creating jobs, we've done about all the tax cutting that we can really do. Now for the high-tech folks, personal property tax is a bit of a barrier. The governor got a little frisky last year. That's $1 billion out of locals. We really can't take that kind of money out of locals. So a few of us were chatting about when it looked like revenues were going to go up significantly about doing replacement of personal property tax to the locals. That's not looking real promising right now. The main reason you would do that is for the high-tech companies that have quick turnover of, if you have a new computer, it's old in 3 years, and so there's some issues there. But one of the things I've said, and particularly to Northwest Indiana, my ex-boss is a CEO, and he loves Indiana, and he tells me what a great place it is. He lives over in Illinois, and I keep saying to him, Valpo's a great place, and you could put your office here. You've got a couple of your... And he said, well, that woman I married to, she wants to know where Nordstrom is. And we forget that businesses move for a lot of reasons more than besides tax. They move for amenities, good schools. I go down and I was driving by the city hall and I saw those banners, #1 city, best schools, best this, best that. Well, businesses are made up of people. And they have expectations of lifestyle for putting in their 10 and 12-hour days. And they want a workforce that's educated, and we need to focus on that. But we also need to focus on all those other amenities that attract businesses, because when they come in, one of the tough things in North Lake County, which isn't in my district, but as those of you who know me, I've spent a lot of time up there. I'm good friends with at least 2 of the 3 mayors. And you have some obligation beyond just where you represent. But one of the difficulties we have is having the amenities and the smoothness of transition for businesses. I think it's good that Lake County has put together this new, we have so many economic development groups over there, I need a Cardex to keep track of them. But a central one that does what we do here in Valpo. When you come in and you're a viable business, we have somebody that makes sure you know all the hoops you have to jump through. But we've been pretty successful in Valpo because we have built those amenities. We have good places to eat, good schools. My wife reminds me we do not have good shopping for her and my daughter, but we need to work on that. And one of the things where we have some real job opportunities, Deb mentioned it, infrastructure, roads and bridges, those kinds of jobs where we're bringing in federal matching money, those jobs generally create more jobs in the trickle down. As you know, probably get me in trouble, but I am who I am. The train down the western corridor is so key to creating jobs in the long term. Across America, transit-oriented development has been a way of rebuilding the middle class. I did 4.5 hours of hearings till almost 11 o'clock at night in Indianapolis. Only 2 people over 45 showed up to testify, universally. I don't understand this, but my kids are somewhat the same way. They don't care if they own a car. They want a cool place to live. They want amenities close by. And transit-oriented development, where you have they're not particularly interested in mowing the lawn either. These are young urban professionals. They're more interested in condominium living and apartment living. We have a number of opportunities. South Hammond near the campus. Quite frankly, Miller would be an opportunity that we can start rebuilding that middle class. So the young people, you don't need people like me moving over there. I'm not sure how long I'll be around, but those under 45-year-old professionals that are graduating from Purdue, Calumet, getting them to stay. One of the big economic boosts, Chicago jobs pay about 38-39% more than the same job in Northwest Indiana. So if we can bring those dollars into Indiana, those dollars leverage up probably 8 jobs for every one, because those dollars come from outside this economy, and those folks in the macro, you put enough of them together, we need another doctor. The doctor needs a nurse. The doctor needs a receptionist. The receptionist needs shoes for her kids. All of those generate jobs. And Will County is the most rapidly growing in Illinois. But I know Illinois, and they will borrow. And if they run the railroad down on their side, they will get the A-list shopping. They will get the things that we can have in that Calumet, Indianapolis Boulevard corridor. And if we could just, I think I spend 2/3 of my time trying to get folks in Northwest Indiana to pull on the same end of the rope. If we could just, Congressman Wisglowski can't work any harder to try to get there. We may, if I'm reelected, we may find some encouragements to help them. But I don't know how else we rebuild the middle class and renew that area. I've said this before, Doug, I'll say it here. Indianapolis walks into a hearing room and they say, we're winners, and if you help us, we'll make money for you. Northwest Indiana walks in and says, you owe me. It doesn't sell anymore. And the truth is, we are winners up here. We got great people. We just got to learn to put little things aside, pull together, and with that huge economic engine in Chicago, the ability to leverage off of that economy into here is key to job growth for Northwest Indiana. But manufacturing jobs per se, I just think I ought to be clear about this. We roll more steel, depends on the week, than we ever have before. But the issue is not jobs going to China. The issue is that when I worked in the steel mill in college, it took 23 of us on a rolling bed to roll car springs. Today it's probably 3 guys, 3 men and women, who have automation. Now what we need is Stu McMillan. I was in his building and he had a new robot, and it was a deburring robot. And so Stu is a good friend, and I said, so Stu, how many jobs you replace with this? He said, none. And I said, well, why did you buy the machine? And he said, I want my people working with their head, not their hands. And he actually bought the machine because he had lost time injuries because of carpal tunnel, this maneuver. And he said, you know, this thing, they type in the computer, tell it what to do, and I don't have any more carpal tunnel out of this particular manufacturing operation. We need guys like Stu McMillan who say, how do I optimize my employee? How do I, which is better, to work with his head or work with his hands? The other thing we need to really capitalize on, building trades are good friends of mine. We have some of the best training centers in the country around here, and we need to figure out ways to make linkages and leverage that better. I was just with a 3-year Iraq veteran this morning and helping me put up signs that had been torn down, and he's looking for a job, and I said, are you aware of hard hats or helmets to hard hats? He said no. So I made a couple phone calls. We need to connect. Some of our most unemployed people are veterans. We need to be in our state connecting those people with the resources that are available, particularly the training programs. One of the things we're doing very poorly here is training the county veteran affairs people to inform veterans of what resources are available to them to retrain.
Okay, Deb, you've got a lot to respond to.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll start with the last one. The veterans issue is a big one. Not only do we have veterans who are unemployed, we have a significant number of veterans who are homeless, and the access to long-term, or as long as they need it, kind of support doesn't seem to be readily available. Indiana has one of the highest percentages in the nation of young people going and serving in the military. That's something that we can be very proud of. And yet we also have one of the lowest usage rates and accessibilities for veterans programs when they come back. And so that is an issue we really need to work on here in Indiana. We just had an incident of a veteran coming home and a baby dying, and that again is in my opinion indicative of the fact that he came in with a diagnosis, but the support for him, the long-term support that he needed to be able to manage his trauma and how that's affecting him wasn't there. And it's a tragic situation, and there's not going to be an easy answer, a good answer to this problem. But, again, it just goes to show we need to do more for our vets. We need to make sure they have access to the very best medical care, the very best kinds of services. And we absolutely cannot tolerate the fact that our veterans are unemployed and homeless after they were willing to give so much in return. And I know that we don't disagree on that very much. I mean, that to me, that's a human issue. It has nothing to do with party affiliation.
The training obviously is something to address the South Shore expansion.
Yes. I firmly believe that what we need to do is, here in Northwest Indiana, is take a regional approach. Valparaiso, for instance, has a city bus line. Valparaiso has, some options available. However, if you live in Portage and you're poor and you don't have money for gas because it's once again up to $4 a gallon, and you have a job interview in Valparaiso, there is no public transportation to do that. And it, crossing county lines. We have PCACS. They do an excellent job with limited resources on helping to provide transportation for seniors and really anybody who needs it. And yet at the same time, there are situations where they're not allowed to cross a county line. We have people who are seeing specialists in another county for health ailments, and they need that transportation, and they're at a disadvantage for that. So, transportation needs to be thought of on a regional basis. How can we make transportation between the cities here in Northwest Indiana happen? South Shore expansion, obviously, that's something that will boost our economy. Goes without saying, having it come down, farther south would be a huge advantage. But again, that's only one piece of the picture. My son lives in New York City, and he does not own a car, has no desire to own a car, and loves the fact that he can, within 20 minutes, be 30 miles away via subway and have access to all sorts of amenities in healthcare or choices in healthcare to jobs and things like that. We don't have that here. Not that we need New York-style transportation, but again, it goes to those young urban professionals who really don't want to be hounded down with a car. And they've got the opportunity to borrow a car for an afternoon, or those kinds of services readily available. They don't want that extra expense, but they do want to be able to go. If they live in Chesterton, they might want to try a restaurant in Valparaiso or one in Miller. How are they going to get there? So these are issues that we really need to have a regional approach to. So.
Okay. You know, the Regional Development Authority is up for reauthorization. The state's currently funding it at $10 million a year out of Major Moves money, but that disappears at the end. So what do you do, Deb?
Well, I think what we need to do is we need to look at the effectiveness of what they've done so far. How effective have they been? And measure their effectiveness before we start, before we start reauthorizing. Is there a need for it? Yes. Is that the best way that we can invest money to get the achieved results? Maybe not. Let's look at their effectiveness. Let's look at their 5-year plan. Let's see what they're doing, what their plan is to do before we just routinely reauthorize them, because there's been an RDA for years and years and years, and we still don't have regional transportation up here.
Okay, Ed?
The RDA is up for renewal. Probably if reelected, I'll carry the bill. I can tell you where my thoughts are at the moment. I stay pretty close to what they're doing. Number one, it is spread way too broadly. A number of us feel Chet Dobus, as you know, is a good friend of mine. We work closely together. We're still friends. His vision was airport, train, bus, Marquette plan, and then this amorphous thing, which really was convention center, that said other economic development opportunities. Under one chairman, that turned into corporate welfare, giving money to companies to come here. We have an IEDC that's supposed to do that. They were able to talk the RDA into diverting funds to that. I have nothing against that. I mean, there's plenty of incentives are part of the game nationwide. If you don't do incentives, the rest of the nation will pick your pocket. But that's not the role of the RDA. So my vision is to close their vision and work on infrastructure and the Marquette plan. Now, the other thing that has not worked well is that the mayors have, Representative Dobus's original vision, and those who created, I think Earlene was part of that, was that they would create a pool of money, which is always risky in government if there's money laying around, that would be used to leverage 4-to-1, 5-to-1 other sources. Some of that they've been able to do, but we certainly are a little concerned when they're doing the reverse. But mayors and some county people wanted instant gratification. Do this, do that, do this, do that. And we wound up with a lot of emphasis on Marquette Plan and some things that were outside of Marquette Plan. Marquette Plan was originally put forth by Congressman Visclosky. It's a good idea to recover our lake shore. It's going to be good for our people. The airport, I would be disingenuous if I didn't say I was frustrated at the rate of progress across America. This happens to be my field. I don't know of a better reliever airport where you can point-to-point travel and be downtown in Chicago or in downtown a major city in 35 minutes. Name one for me. I'd like to know where it is. Our problem has been, I had a charter business there when I was 19 years old, and the problem is the same. We have not been able to put together a good management team that understands the airline industry. There are opportunities there, but people are starting to get frustrated that it's taking so long. So the airport, though, stays still a huge opportunity. Secondly, the train I've already talked about. Thirdly, the RBA was created and legislation is still there, but it was a failure. And the failure was the consistent failure of Northwest Indiana, and that is the inability to pull on the same end of the rope. We do need a mass transit system. Quite frankly, the RBA had a very, very good beginning master plan. It was a gridded system, so and across both counties. everybody thinks to have, not everybody, but the general thinking is to have a bus system, you've got to have great big buses. You gauge, just like an airline, you gauge the bus size to the demand. And you need the core, the base, where we have a very aging population, is on-demand buses. So the grid system was good that was laid out, but we had a lot of petty arguing. And unfortunately, the board was too big. The board had a lot of special interest on it. And some friends of mine and I, we got a complete restructuring of the board through the House, and it got killed in the Senate. Probably not the place to discuss the sausage making of why it died. But quite frankly, as urbanized as we are in these two counties, and I would include Michigan City if we could get LaPorte on board, that is something I would keep in the RDA. Now let me deal with the last piece, and that's your $10 million. Senator Kenley, a very powerful guy. He has made it very, very clear there will be no general fund money going to the RDA unless it is attached to a project which can be overseen by the Budget Committee. I have relayed that to the RDA for the last 3 years. There were skeptics. I think they're starting to believe it now. I think if we structured appropriately, we might have a chance. The train opportunity, I don't know how long we'll have Pete Visklosky, and he is key. Even if he's in the minority, he is absolutely key to being able to get the federal funding and so forth. So we need to put that in the forefront. Now I'll sit down, assuming I'm going back. If not, I won't. But I'll sit down with the key players and say, okay, here's a draft. Here's what we'll propose. My favorite at the moment is the train. And then Congressman Visklosky is concerned that we will not spend adequately on the Marquette plan. I think you can use the locally generated funds for Marquette plan, and if we can get some, we'll be competing with everybody else. I mean, that's how the system works. And the one thing we can't have, Doug, because my colleagues down south wait for this, we can't get it all shaped up, get through conference committee, be in there in the last hearing and have somebody come in and say, I'm against this, because Senator Kenley will look at me and he'll say, now, Ed, when you get everybody on board, why don't you come back and see us? So that has hurt us again and again and again. And hopefully we will learn by those errors and be able to unify around some project. So I also have to say a concern of mine in the RDA right now is that one city is having a tendency to withhold money from the RDA when it doesn't get its way. And there is a remedy for that, and that may be in order if we can't solve it another way. Is that vague enough for you, Doug?
I think we all understand who we're talking about here. I should open it to questions from everyone else if you prefer.
Well, I asked a question this morning that got a pretty interesting debate at another legislative session. So I'll ask you both. Does Northwest Indiana get its fair share from Indianapolis, or is there more that should be done? I hear that a lot. I'm new, and I hear that, you know, we don't get enough here and we deserve more, and but I tend to think we do get our share. But I just want to hear your take on it, and both of you, if you think the region gets its fair share, and if not, what you can do about it.
Go ahead.
Deb?
Whether or not it actually gets its fair share, I don't know. But the perception out there is that we don't. And in school, a lot of times in conflict management, we start with perception is the reality. And if that is the perception, then that's what the reality that we have to operate on in. So the question might be not whether or not the dollar amount is the fair share, but what services or what items are people feeling that the state should be doing better? What do they feel that the state needs to be sending up here if it's not coming? So to me, you know, to me, whether or not, the dollar line might not be the most important issue on whether or not we're getting our fair share. The question is, well, what spending from the state do you believe we need up here? And then let's go from there and see if it's adequate for our needs up here.
It's interesting to serve both places. My wife and I are lucky enough we can live almost anywhere we want, and Doug's heard me say it over and over. We live here because we like it here. We like the people and so forth. So, but I'm down there and I'm up here, and the perception down there is we always have our hand out, and the perception is here we're owed a lot more and we're not getting it. Now, in metric dollars, Lake County is the second highest recipient of infrastructure dollars in the entire state, and rightly so. One of the things we're talking about is how do we create the priority list. Right now, INDOT creates a priority list, and let's talk about infrastructure right now, based upon safety first, and then congestion and a little bit of environment mitigation. Everybody argues that their project is economic development. So one of the things that we use, I've served at the National Academy of Sciences on the Aeronautics and Space Engineering Board for 12 years, and I thought I just got rid of it. Now I'm just been asked to serve on a panel to create certification standards for new technologies. But one of the tools we use frequently are Monte Carlo multivariate modeling. And there's a tool called REMI. And it's not quite suited for what I want to do, and the commissioner's coming around to my way of thinking. Basically, it says for economic development, let's use an economist instead of an engineer. Let's load the front end and have it come out of the model with a rating number of economic contribution of that particular road. Should we add extra lanes to 65, or should we build a new road somewhere? Now those models are pretty good, but they're not perfect. So let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, widening 41 it gets an 80, and extra lanes on 65 gets an 81. You got to bring stakeholders together and make sure you agree that the inputs were the appropriate inputs. But what we'd like to do is, there are roads. Let me pick a good example. Some counties are wealthier than others. We might have a county that grows a lot of corn, and we might have an ethanol plant, and both those counties are fairly well-to-do. And here's a county in between that the trucks have to haul the corn on, and it's got 12,000 residents. How do we maintain their roads in a world where farming is now 18-wheelers instead of... So trying to find economic modeling that says here is the right place to put dollars. Now, one of our weaknesses in Northwest Indiana, remember I did say I love it here and I plan to live here for a long time. I'm the governor's appointee to NERPC. We spend a lot of time on bike paths, and they're important, but we have not laid out a good plan for how to move people, goods, and services east to west and north to south. There's some of us that have been talking about extending 249 to 100 South, which connects the three big economic areas of Merrillville, Valpo, and Portage. But because of poor planning, 100 South, the homes are so close to the road that if we build that wider, we're going to have some pretty big dissatisfaction. But yet we have an exit onto I-65. So getting our planning entity to take some political risk and say this is the right thing to do to make our economy more efficient and to move goods and services is something we need to do. When you go to Indianapolis, now I'm not on board with this yet. I don't think I will be. They want to build what's called a commerce connector. Some people do. The mayor doesn't. They're sitting there with shovel-ready ideas ready to go. For 30 years, I heard about the Ileana. I carried the bill to study the Ileana. The study came back, and it said, you need to build this yesterday, and we wound up in open warfare. So the whole point of Ileana is that the Panama Canal is being widened. Much of the shipping that is coming into Long Beach will be going to Baltimore and Norfolk. Norfolk Southern, CSX have spent over $1 billion getting their tunnels ready to handle that additional shipping, which will come off the rails onto the trucks. Right now, 8094 is rated F at certain times of the day. There's no place to add any more lanes. About half of the traffic on 8094 is not stopping in Chicago or here. It's going to the south or it's going to the west. Illiana is to move that traffic to the south. We've already talked to the big trucking companies, not like we stood around and did nothing. It's to move that traffic to the south so that we can keep 8094 about where it is. Because without Illiana, when 8094 shuts down, you can look at the real stuff and the modeling when it grows, and it all goes to US 30, Highway 6, and we wind up with our retail shopping areas loaded with trucks and makes it intimidating to our folks. So there is a real plan. We modeled it. We did lots of things to say this is the right thing to do. And yet fortunately, it's not us, it's Illinois that's hanging us up right now. But it's very, very essential. But how much work you go through just to get something that the numbers, and I can tell you the Edmund Gartman Farm, 49 goes right through it. And I wasn't alive when that happened, but I can tell you that they were protesting then, and if I went into your files, when they built 49 bypass, when they built the toll road, there were people who didn't like it. But sooner or later, you have to do some things that not everyone likes. And if we're going to grow this area, we're going to have to do some things that have to be done. And if we're going to be able to get federal money because everybody's talking about infrastructure right now, we have to have things that say, hey, we need some here, and here's where we will spend it. I can tell you with the federal government and the state government saying, hey, I didn't get as much as you did, give me some, with no plan of how you're going to spend it, it sounds nice, and you may get some nice letters to the editor, but nothing's going to happen. We need to start thinking together, and we need to start planning together, and we need to have laying there, here are projects that if $1 becomes available, we can do them. I'm all for education. I believe in public education. 51% of every tax dollar goes there, and that doesn't include, that's K through 12, another 11% to higher ed. But we still have to, if we can't get the kids to school, and after they graduate they can't get to work, it's a losing model. So it'd be my sermon for today. We have to get infrastructure in our vision, and we have to figure out how we're going to pay for it.
I don't want to beat a dead horse and over-continue this because we are almost at an hour. But I think sometimes every time we ask this question, we get back talking about INDOT and infrastructure.
Right.
But I think that up here, people also talk about 2 stadiums in 20 years. I don't know how much money to the Speedway and different things. I mean, it's a joke, but there is a reason why the General Assembly is called the biggest city council in the world. So I think there are other things that the General Assembly does for Indianapolis. The IEDC, I see a lot more activity throughout the rest of the state than I do. I see it in Fort Wayne. I don't see them here in Northwest Indiana and Porter County as much as I read about them.
Can I answer your question?
Yes.
I'd be glad to, because when Charlie comes up and delivers that sermon, they tax themselves down there. They're not a penny a state tax going in to those stadiums. They formed a group, they tax themselves, they build. They come in and say, when the track, which brings huge dollars, we didn't give them money. They came in and they said, loan us money, we will give you, not give, loan us money. You can have a tax to pay down that debt based upon the tickets. You can have equity in the place if we default. And they treated it like a business and asked us for a loan. We tried to have a referendum up here to build a train in my second year. And the mayor of Hammond killed it by saying he wouldn't allow it on the ballot because he was Democratic chairman. I can tell you that down there, the big cultural difference between there and here, and I live here because I like it here, but Republican or Democrat, when they come in, and it's in their economic interest, they'll call each other every name under the sun, but their trembling finger can find that green button. And up here, our mark is if somebody has an idea, we'll get right to the starting gate, and somebody has to come in and say, where's mine? And if I don't get mine, I'm going to kill the whole thing. So when we start learning, I don't want to put them on a pedestal, but I get tired of hearing this. We gave them $100 million for a racetrack. No, we didn't. We lent it to them. We built them 2 stadiums. No, they got, when I was in high school, Indianapolis was a dump. I went to IU to tour the medical center, and they said, you can go to IU med school and never see the light of day. And I said, why is that important? And they said, you don't want to be above ground. Today I own a condominium 7 blocks from the State House, and I walk to it at 1 o'clock in the morning. Because R's and D's put their party in their back pocket and said, we're going to do what's right, and we're not going to, they'll fight with each other. I mean, that's human nature. But up here, I've watched it for 8 years. You'll get a Chet Dobus, you'll get somebody who will pay enormous political price. Do you know how much work it was to get the Ileana through the NERPC? We had a labor leader in every politician's office every week saying, we need your vote, we need your vote, we need your vote. When they wanted mass transit, they had 188 organizations out of the Beltway and county come in. I had to limit the testimony to 45 people. I said to the forum, you need to do what Indianapolis did. How many entities can you put together that'll say we need a train? I'm still waiting to see it. So that's a pretty strong answer, but I feel like I've worked pretty doggone hard for 8 years to try to put things together. But I went over to talk about tax policy in Hammond, and they introduced me as welcome to Southeastern Europe. And we've got to stop that. We just plain have to stop that. We've got to say, hey, we're as good as anybody in Indianapolis. They'll give us a referendum anytime we want it. Same thing, they'll give us the same rules as Indianapolis. It's just we can't seem to put it together to get it done. And like I say, I mean, Pete's working on one. I've never seen anybody work harder than Pete did. I've helped him when I can. It's not always a welcome face in my county, but I didn't mean to be so direct, but that's the issue.
I'm glad that you answered that, because that's what I hear all the time
Sure.
from people here, so now.
I hear Charlie say that. I heard him. I sat in a meeting, and he talked about we gave Indianapolis $100 million. And I go, there's the bill. I voted for it. It's a good business deal. We get equity in the track. Here's the return on investment. Here's how many races we get. And by the way, to make the payments, you get to tax the tickets, and the money goes to us. Business deal.
Okay, Deb?
In my the first thing that comes to mind is there's a lot of difference between a stadium and its ability to have a way to generate a little extra money to pay off a loan than people who are using a train to go to work, to jobs, and that sort of thing. That being said, we do need to work together. We do need people who will build consensus across the party lines, across the region here, so that we can achieve the goals of growing our area and making it the type of place that people will want to live, work, reside long term. So.
Okay. We should ask, what is the primary difference between you and your opponent, Deb?
The primary difference. First of all, I go into this as an educator. What an educator does is bring people to a level of knowledge, build consensus, bring people along, show them the way, not to dictate to them, but to help them see the logical agreement. As a teacher, that's what we do all the time. You know, we want the students, we tell them why it's important to know this information, and then we give it to them and we ask them to use that knowledge now and do this. And I see a lot of the issues that have come, that we've talked about today, that type of person would be the type of person who would be successful, because they're able to build that consensus. They're able to get potential stakeholders to really have stake in it and say, yeah, you know, I do see how this would help me. You know, maybe if we need 180 people to say, yes, we need a train here, well, maybe they need to be shown why they need a train. Those kinds of things that come naturally to a teacher. And secondly, as a woman, obviously, there's a major difference between the two of us, but that also goes to how women tend to approach an issue. And again, women tend to come at it with the attitude that there is going to be consensus building, and there is going to be a level where we're all going to reach an agreement. And we tend not to dig in and hold on to ground. Not that that isn't important sometimes, because sometimes right is right and wrong is wrong, and we need to make that stand. But at the same time, our brains are wired differently in that respect to be the people who can bring consensus into a group. So I guess my background as an educator, my possession of a female brain, those are probably the two bigger differences.
Okay, yeah.
I think first of all, I bring a long history of bringing people together. Commercial aviation safety team, unions, management, manufacturers, people who don't like each other. And we came to a solution. State House's chairman of the Transportation Committee. Product, 40% increase in funding, and almost every bill but one this year came out bipartisan. I don't see that as a difference, and school must be different, because I recall the teacher was pretty much in control when I was there. But maybe we take a vote to see if we do the physics test this week. But at any rate, I have a long history of bringing people together. I have a long history of understanding of multiple issues. At my previous employ, the years I spent as a pilot, after that, I had 11 direct reports, everything from environment to occupational safety to flight safety. I have a lot of government experience working with Washington. And with a successful record. I didn't sit there and eat the shrimp, and I sure don't here. I have a good relationship with Democrats and Republicans. In fact, I did a fundraiser the other night, and a friend of mine said, in 30 years of going to fundraisers, I've never been at one where management and labor were in the same room. My daughter's wedding 2 weeks ago, we had labor leaders, we had Democrats, we had Republicans, we had Greek Orthodox, Jewish. I think that I have a pretty well demonstrated record of bringing people together with a lot of successes. I got bills passed when I was in the minority. I got bills passed when I was in the majority. And I've had the perseverance when this is a world where you can think you have it all together and it fails. That was the first year with the little Cal. We brought it back together and got it done the second year. Mayor McDermott and I had a major disagreement. We found a venue where we could get an agreement. Not always the easiest thing to do. But I bring knowledge in the transportation area. I bring a track record of bringing people together. There are only a few of us that cross the aisle effectively. It'll be a Republican majority. I don't know any pollster who says it won't. I have been, along with Representative Dermody, the voice of reason between the radical education reformers and the more radical preserve the status quo. the voucher system. Representative Dermody and I both were opposed to vouchers for a lot of reasons, probably not the same reasons as my opponent, but they were going to pass it. And 18 people were going to vote the way I did. And we asked in exchange for voting for it that we put about 12 restrictions to see how it would work. The problem with rapid change is if you change, one of the burdens we're putting on our teachers in education is so much paper and so much change. We need to stabilize things. Now that is not a universally held viewpoint, but I think that being on the Republican side, being common sense, having a lot of scars from doing things wrong over a lifetime, I think having someone from Northwest Indiana that brings that credibility and that common sense and that ability to walk across the aisle is something that is positive for Northwest Indiana.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. With Ed Soliday, the incumbent for State Representative in District 4, and Deb Porter, the Democratic challenger, thank you for viewing.